What if the edge of reality isn't a distant horizon, but a quiet tension already forming around us? Subtle, delicate, and almost desperate to be noticed. What if the universe, which we trust to be stable and eternal, has begun whispering through small fractures we have only just learned to hear? And what if these whispers are not warnings, but invitations to look deeper than any human mind has dared to look before? When we gaze at the night sky, we assume the stars are steady, ancient, unmoving. But imagine standing beneath that sky and sensing a faint pressure behind it, as though the darkness itself is a thin curtain stretched over something vast and restless. You can't see it directly, but you feel it. An intuition, a pull, a question rising inside you without words. Why does the universe look so calm when the data tells a different story? Why does something so immense behave as though it's holding its breath? For decades, scientists believed the cosmos was smooth, predictable, and governed by laws that never change. But slowly, almost reluctantly, the universe began revealing inconsistencies. A cold region larger than any known structure, light bending where no mass exists, galaxies duplicated faintly in ways that defy symmetry, as if reality tried to copy itself, but left the reflection slightly unfinished. These aren't simple errors, they are fingerprints. Tiny, repeated marks hinting at forces or structures beyond the visible edge. Imagine receiving light that started its journey billions of years ago, only to discover that something interfered with it halfway. The photons arrive tired, distorted, as if squeezed through an invisible turbulence. Space should not ripple like that, not unless something outside is pushing against it, not unless the universe is being touched. Even time has shown signs of instability. Atomic clocks on different continents once drifted by identical microseconds, a shift impossible to blame on human factors. No solar flares, no atmospheric disturbances, only a synchronized hesitation across the planet. A fraction of a second where time seemed uncertain, like a step missed on a staircase. Most people didn't notice, but the universe noticed. Instruments recorded it, equations bent reluctantly to account for it, and researchers quietly asked each other whether something had rippled across space-time too fast, too subtle, or too strange for human senses. Sometimes, it feels as if reality is a fabric stretched to perfection, yet thinning at the edges, revealing the faint outline of something moving beneath it. Something breathing, something observing. Not necessarily hostile, not necessarily benevolent, just present, waiting for us to acknowledge that our familiar universe might be only the first layer of a far deeper structure. Even the cosmic microwave background, the oldest light in existence, carries an imprint that shouldn't be there, patterns too organized, too deliberate, almost like the shadow of a grid behind reality. Scientists call it anomaly, but anomaly is just another word for we don't know what's touching our world. And if the universe has a boundary, then boundaries can be crossed. Consider the eerie phenomenon of vanishing frames in telescope recordings. Not black screens, not corrupted data, simply missing, like the universe forgot to show its work for a moment. Observatories thousands of miles apart recorded the same gaps. What do we call a moment where the cosmos fails to render itself? A glitch? A tear? A hint that the structure holding everything together is beginning to slip? Imagine watching a candle flame flicker inside a perfectly sealed room. The flame shouldn't move, yet it does. Not because of wind, but because of pressure changes occurring outside the room's walls. The universe is like that room. Every distortion, every cold spot, every unexplained echo could be the flicker of our cosmic flame, responding to shifts beyond the walls we cannot see. And then there are gravitational waves, ripples in space-time caused by massive events like black hole collisions. But recently, scientists found phase shifts in these waves that don't match any known geometry, as if the waves distorted when passing near an unseen boundary, as if the universe has edges not defined by distance, but by tension. And tension always points towards stress. Stress comes from force, and force implies interaction. What could interact with the universe from the outside? Another universe pressing against ours, a higher dimensional structure flexing its surface? Or something conscious, something aware, something studying us with the same curiosity with which we study cells under a microscope? If the universe is a membrane floating in a cosmic ocean, then the waves of that ocean might be touching us now, Some researchers have quietly proposed that the anomalies increase in locations where the cosmic horizon appears slightly brighter or darker than expected, almost like pressure points on the skin of the cosmos. Pressure points imply touch. Touch implies proximity. And proximity implies that whatever lies beyond is closer than ever before. Even consciousness reacts. People worldwide report identical dreams during nights when cosmic disturbances peak. Dreams of doors opening to blinding light, of walls becoming thin, of distant humming growing louder. It could all be coincidence. Or it could be the human mind sensing tiny fractures long before instruments do, the way animals sense tremors before earthquakes. In those moments of déjà vu, where reality feels slightly misaligned, have we touched the boundary? When you feel a sudden shift in your surroundings without explanation, is it merely your mind? Or has the fabric around you flickered for a heartbeat? These thoughts are unsettling, yet strangely comforting. Because if the universe is cracking, then cracks reveal what was hidden. And for the first time, humanity may be standing at the edge of knowing, not through mythology or imagination, but through data, patterns, and cosmic fingerprints, aligning into a message we are just beginning to decode. Perhaps the universe is not breaking down. Perhaps it is breaking open. If reality does have edges, those edges were never meant to be static. They evolve, adapt, respond. And now, more than ever, those edges tremble with the unmistakable rhythm of change. Something is approaching, or awakening, or remembering we exist. So we must ask, when the universe begins to reveal its seams, what will spill through them? A deeper truth about existence? A new layer of space-time? A neighboring cosmos brushing against our own? Or the realization that everything we know is just the first chapter of a far greater structure? Tonight, as we stand beneath a sky filled with ancient light, listen closely. Not with your ears, but with the quiet intuition that lives deeper than thought. The universe is shifting, the edge is reacting, and the cracks, however faint, are already there. This is where our journey begins. What if the universe didn't always behave like a single story, but more like overlapping drafts? Pages written, erased, rewritten, and sometimes left with faint traces of what came before. What if the anomalies we see are not mistakes, but scars left behind by earlier versions of reality brushing against the one we live in now? And what if, without knowing it, we are already witnessing physics quietly rewriting itself in slow, trembling strokes? The deeper scientists look, the more reality behaves like a system under pressure. Not chaotic pressure, but structured, almost patterned, the way ice forms delicate fractures before fully changing state. The first real tremor came from an experiment so simple that no one expected anything unusual. Synchronized lasers fired across long vacuum tunnels. Their beams should have returned at the exact same instant, perfectly predictable. But on a winter night in 2018, they didn't. One beam returned a fraction earlier than physics allowed, the other a fraction late, as if time itself had stretched on one side and collapsed on the other. At first, it seemed like instrument failure. Wires were checked, mirrors recalibrated, sensors replaced. Yet, the anomaly persisted. It showed up across different facilities, different continents, even different technologies. The only common thread was the timing. Every distortion coincided with subtle shifts observed at the cosmic horizon, as if the edge of the universe gently tugged at the flow of time within it, sending faint ripples across billions of light years. Imagine water in a glass, still, calm, undisturbed. Now imagine barely touching its surface with the tip of a finger. The entire sheet trembles. That's what time seems to be doing now, reacting to a contact point too faint for our senses, but clear in the data. The universe we depend on may not be as untouched as we once believed. Even more unsettling are the quantum events that followed. Particles behaving like they had been nudged from a direction no physical axis could explain. Electrons shifting slightly, like leaves responding to an invisible breeze. The shifts were microscopic, but consistent. Something small, rhythmic, persistent. Something pressing from outside the known dimensions. Quantum physicists have a quiet phrase for this: directional noise. But noise, by definition, should be random. This isn't. It pulses. It repeats. It aligns with the regions of sky where the cosmic boundary shows the most severe distortions, and that alignment is impossible to dismiss. As this evidence grew, scientists began to whisper a theory they once avoided. Maybe the universe is not failing, but being inspected. Not by aliens, not by conscious entities in the way we imagine, but by layers of reality above ours. The way a higher dimensional environment might occasionally press into its lower dimensional neighbor. If our universe is a membrane floating in a deeper structure, then collisions, touches, and pressures are not only possible, they're inevitable. A strange, unsettling symmetry began to emerge. Measurements from deep space probes showed gravity behaving inconsistently at the edges of the solar system. Not broken, not absent, just slightly off, like a compass near a magnetic seam. A faint drift in the curvature of space-time, subtle enough to ignore, but consistent enough to demand explanation. Something was pulling, but not from within. Imagine you are inside a giant soap bubble. You can't see through the bubble's surface, but if something pushes against it, you feel the curve around you shift. The light inside bends differently. The air pressure changes slightly. You notice it even without knowing what touched the bubble from the outside. That, scientists believe, is what's happening now. The universe isn't just expanding, it's distorting, responding to pressure from regions beyond anything we can observe. Mathematicians studying the distortions notice something remarkable. The anomalies follow a pattern that resembles the stress lines in thin films, structures stretched between two forces. Every time the cosmic boundary flickers, quantum events inside the universe flicker in harmony, as though something powerful but distant is tugging gently on the edges of everything we know. And then came the moment that truly disturbed the scientific world, a coordinated glitch across multiple atomic clocks around Earth. These clocks are engineered to be so precise that they would lose a single second over millions of years, yet they drifted together, simultaneously, by a margin far too large to ignore. It wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't human error, it was as if time itself blinked. Imagine trying to hold your breath. Even if you succeed for a moment, your body shudders before breathing again. The universe did something like that, a brief hesitation in its own rhythm, a stutter in the flow that holds reality together, and if time can hesitate, it can fracture, it can thin, it can reveal what lies beneath it. Some researchers now believe the drift in these atomic clocks wasn't random. It coincided perfectly with a faint pulse detected at the edge of the universe, an oscillation in the cosmic background that behaves almost like a heartbeat. A heartbeat of what? A neighboring universe overlapping ours? A deeper dimensional field brushing against our space-time? Or the underlying engine of reality revealing its cycles for the first time? These questions lead to darker possibilities, because if the universe has a heartbeat, then it also has a pulse. And pulse implies rhythm. And rhythm implies something coordinating, something oscillating, something trying to maintain stability against rising strain. Scientists studying gravitational waves found a strange shift in their patterns too. Some waves arrived slightly too early, others too late, not because of distance or speed, but because they seemed to stretch or compress when passing near regions of cosmic distortion, like sound warping around a cracked wall. Imagine shouting in a vast cavern. The echoes return differently depending on where the walls are smooth or fractured. The universe may be doing the same with gravitational waves, and the fractures are no longer isolated. They're growing, stretching into thin arcs across the sky, faint but undeniable. But perhaps the most unnerving sign comes from the behavior of dark energy. Its acceleration seems to be changing, not randomly, but following a subtle curve that suggests external influence. It's as if something is tugging at the universe from the outside, stretching space-time faster in some regions, slower in others, like a hand smoothing fabric, feeling for imperfections. If dark energy is reacting, then reality is responding to an external force. What kind of force reaches across universes? What kind of structure could compress space-time itself? These questions push us into uncomfortable territory, into models where universes exist like layers of film, where dimensions fold like origami, where cosmic boundaries can ripple under contact. Models where what we call the universe is only one chamber in a much larger labyrinth, and something in that labyrinth is moving. We might imagine this movement as a drift, two universes passing near each other, their edges brushing lightly, or as a compression, pressure building as structures shift in higher dimensional space, or as something more deliberate, an inspection, a resonance test, a kind of cosmic sonar from an intelligence or process beyond comprehension. Not an attack, not communication, something even more profound, a higher system checking the structural integrity of its lower dimension. And if that integrity is failing, the signatures are exactly what we'd expect. Time drifting, boundaries flickering, gravitational waves bending, quantum fields trembling. These aren't signs of doom. They're signs of strain. The first hints of a larger structure making contact. Perhaps the universe isn't dying. Perhaps it's being touched. Perhaps the cracks aren't fractures, but openings. And if they're openings, what is waiting on the other side? What if the universe has a horizon, not because it ends there, but because something beyond it limits what we're allowed to see? What if the cosmic boundary, the farthest edge of observable existence, is not a natural limit, but a membrane under tension, reacting to forces from a realm larger than anything our equations can hold? And what if that membrane has begun to change shape, revealing hints of a truth too vast for us to comprehend? For centuries, astronomers assumed the universe was uniform on the largest scales, a smooth and endless backdrop stretching beyond imagination. But the more sensitive our telescopes became, the less uniform the horizon appeared. Subtle warps, unexpected gradients, light arriving with slight, almost imperceptible twists. At first, each distortion seemed like a solitary anomaly, a tiny puzzle piece with no clear image to belong to. But over time, a pattern formed. The distortions weren't random. They seemed aligned, like tension lines radiating from an invisible pressure just beyond the farthest galaxy. Picture a vast balloon, expanding gently. At first, the surface is smooth, but as the internal pressure rises and external forces shift, thin regions begin to stretch unevenly. The balloon doesn't break, but its surface reveals stress lines, patterns that hint at what's touching it from outside. The universe's horizon is beginning to look like that balloon. A surface under stress, revealing invisible fingerprints of forces pressing against it. One of the most mysterious of these fingerprints is the so-called shimmer, a term whispered among cosmologists who hesitate to publish what they see. It isn't a literal shimmer, not light in the traditional sense. It's a faint statistical oscillation in the background radiation, a wobble where no wobble should exist. A subtle flicker in the oldest light of the universe, behaving as if the boundary is pulsing, stretching, resonating, not randomly, not chaotically, but rhythmically. What kind of structure pulses at the edge of a universe? What kind of force makes space-time itself fluctuate like the surface of a drum? These questions grew heavier when researchers discovered something even stranger. The shimmer seemed to move, slowly, deliberately, almost like a wave traveling across a membrane. It took months for the data to reveal the motion clearly, but once it did, the conclusion was inescapable. Something was brushing against the cosmic boundary, creating ripples that traveled around the edge of everything. Imagine touching the surface of a pond, lightly with your fingertip. Even the smallest touch sends ripples outward, circling the water. Now imagine the universe is that pond, and something from outside has touched its surface. We are the tiny creatures living in the water, perceiving only the ripples and not the fingertip itself. But the pattern of the ripples tells a story of contact, a story of proximity, a story of intrusion. And just as these ripples became undeniable, another phenomenon emerged, gravitational lensing that made no gravitational sense. Light from distant galaxies bent in ways too sharp, too clean, too structured, as though passing near a curvature not caused by mass, but by a boundary under mechanical strain. The curves were too symmetrical, too geometric. Nature rarely draws perfect shapes, but something beyond nature, something structural, might. A breakthrough came when analysts overlaid the gravitational lensing data with the shimmer patterns. The alignment was uncanny. The distortions traced the same arcs, the same boundaries, the same invisible curves tugging at space-time, like the outline of a silhouette pressed against a thin curtain. We cannot see the silhouette. We only see the fabric bending around it, but the fabric is bending more each year. Some theorists began to imagine a larger cosmic architecture, multiple universes arranged like bubbles in a higher dimensional foam, occasionally brushing against each other, sharing pressure, exchanging tiny quanta of information. When two bubbles drift close enough, their surfaces distort, their internal physics bend, their edges ripple, and if they drift closer still, the membranes may even fuse, creating regions of overlap where laws begin to break down. This is what the cosmic horizon looks like right now. A membrane under stress, flexing under an approaching presence. Yet, the most chilling discovery came not from telescopes, but from repeating deep space scans. When astronomers mapped the horizon over multiple years, they noticed something impossible. Portions of the horizon appeared to move inward, as if the universe were shrinking, while other portions expanded outward. Not uniformly, not symmetrically, but as though an external shape was pressing against one side, pushing the entire cosmic membrane inward, while pulling it outward on the opposite side. Universes aren't supposed to behave like this. If expansion were the cause, it would be uniform. If dark energy were fluctuating, the shifts would be random. But these distortions were patterned, coherent, intentional in appearance, even if not literal intention. It almost looked like the universe was being squeezed. Imagine a vast bubble drifting through a dark ocean. Now imagine a huge unseen shape gliding nearby. Even if their surfaces never touch, the water pressure alone changes the bubble's shape. The bubble bulges, collapses, stretches. The creatures inside feel the shifts without ever seeing the cause. That's what the cosmic horizon is doing now. Bulging, shrinking, trembling. And we are the creatures inside. But the most haunting evidence was still waiting at the center of the galaxy. Astronomers studying the supermassive black hole at the Milky Way's core noticed a faint oscillation in its orbit, so faint that only the most precise measurements could detect it. It wasn't orbiting another object. It wasn't interacting with dark matter. Instead, its oscillation matched the pulse observed at the cosmic horizon. The two extremes of the universe, the farthest edge and its central heart, were vibrating in harmony, as if responding to the same external force. What kind of force affects both the center and the boundary of a universe simultaneously? Only something larger than the universe itself. This led physicists to a hypothesis so bold it bordered on unsettling. The universe might be embedded in a larger dimensional field, and fluctuations in that field are now becoming strong enough to tug directly on cosmic structures. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. If true, then reality is reacting not to internal physics, but to the proximity of something beyond it. And then came the most dramatic shift of all, a faint pattern detected in the distribution of dark energy, a pattern resembling interference, like waves colliding from the outside. The interference was subtle but consistent. It echoed across billions of light years, and the equations describing it resembled the mathematical signature of two membranes vibrating in close contact. If the universe has neighbors, one of them is very close. The cosmic horizon may not be a boundary. It may be a contact zone, a thin skin where universes press against each other, trading pressure, exchanging information, leaving fingerprints of their presence. If the shimmer is a ripple, the gravitational arcs are the dents, and the dark energy interference is the echo of a larger structure moving in the deep. For the first time in history, we might be witnessing the universe respond to an approaching presence. The horizon didn't always pulse. The membrane didn't always warp. The center didn't always tremble. Something changed. Something is near. And the cracks, if they are cracks, are not random fractures. They are signs of strain before a shift. The universe might be preparing to open, or merge, or defend itself, or transform. But one truth rises deeper than fear. If reality has an edge, then beyond that edge exists something vast enough to reshape the entire cosmos simply by drifting close. And right now, that something is closer than ever. What if the first signs of contact between universes do not come as light or matter, but as echoes, whispers in cosmic frequencies we were never meant to hear? What if the signals drifting through space are not messages sent to us, but side effects of something vast brushing against the fabric of reality, causing vibrations that ripple across creation, like sound waves passing through a wall? And what if those echoes have already begun to answer events before they occur, hinting at a deeper architecture where time flows differently, or perhaps not at all? The earliest hints came as strange radio bursts, signals that didn't match the signature of pulsars, quasars, or any known celestial body. They were short, sharp, precise, almost mechanical. But the most unsettling part wasn't their shape, it was their timing. These bursts often arrived seconds before the cosmic events they were associated with, before a distant star flared, before a gamma ray burst unfolded, before a cosmic collision released its predictable flood of energy. It was as though the universe was speaking slightly ahead of itself. Scientists dismissed it at first, calling it coincidental precursor noise. But coincidence does not repeat with mathematical precision, and noise does not mimic the exact signature of events that haven't yet happened. It was as if the edge of reality was sending ripples inward, announcing what was coming before it arrived, like a drumbeat heard before the footsteps of the drummer. Imagine walking down a hallway and hearing vibrations in the walls that match the movement you are about to make. Imagine stepping forward and realizing the echo of your future step has already reached your ear. What would that say about the hallway? Or about the space beyond it? These echoes were subtle at first, but they grew stranger with time. Some bursts carried frequencies not found in nature, ultra-clean, ultra-stable signals that looked engineered, yet no intelligence we know could create them, not because they are too complex, but because they follow a geometry that belongs to higher dimensional mathematics. These signals weren't messages. They were outlines, shadows of events occurring beyond our universe casting faint impressions onto ours. And the most chilling discovery came when researchers plotted the origin points of these echoes. They did not come from stars or galaxies. They came from the voids between them, regions of space that should be silent, empty, lifeless. But instead, those voids shimmered with faint, structured signals. Not chaotic, not random, structured, rhythmic, predictable, as though something outside the universe was tapping gently on the walls of our reality. One astrophysicist described it quietly to a colleague. It feels like someone is knocking from the other side, not as communication, not as warning, simply as pressure. To understand these echoes, scientists began comparing them to gravitational waves, the ripples caused by massive cosmic events. But gravitational waves travel through space-time itself. What these new echoes traveled through was something higher, something that seemed to bleed from outside the known dimensions. When analyzed, the frequencies aligned with theoretical vibrations, predicted by models of multiversal membranes, colliding, drifting, or resonating near each other. Imagine two enormous sheets of metal suspended in darkness. When one moves, even slightly, the vibrations travel across its surface, into the air, and into the other sheet. The sheets never touch, yet each feels the movement of the other. Our universe may be one such sheet, and the echoes we detect might be the vibrations from the sheet beside us. But something else soon emerged, something even more unsettling. These echoes began to synchronize with quantum anomalies on Earth. When the signals pulsed, particle experiments recorded impossible fluctuations. Electrons shifted energy states without clear cause. Entangled particles behaved as if influenced by an external rhythm, not random, not chaotic, patterned. The universe began to look less like a closed system and more like an instrument being played by an unseen hand. Imagine being inside a violin, unaware of the musician outside. The string you sit upon vibrates, not because of anything within your tiny world, but because something larger is drawing a bow across it. That is how these quantum events behaved, vibrations triggered by a source outside the boundaries of our space-time. And then came the moment that changed everything. The echoes responded to our actions. In a series of experiments, scientists directed intense energy bursts into specific cosmic frequencies to see how the boundary would react. They predicted nothing would happen, but something did. The cosmic horizon shimmered slightly brighter in the exact moments the bursts were fired, as if the membrane flinched or answered. The universe reacted. Not violently, not intentionally, but undeniably. It was as though our reality briefly resonated with something touching it from the outside. The horizon flickered, quantum fields trembled, radio telescopes recorded a faint rise in background noise, a soft, almost musical hum, like metal resonating under pressure. This hum grew stronger in the months that followed, spreading across more regions of the sky. It behaved like vibration patterns in materials under stress, not a collapse, not a tearing, more like a tuning. Two structures adjusting to each other's presence, aligning, responding. Some researchers began to describe this phenomenon as cosmic breathing. The boundary brightened, dimmed, brightened again. in a slow rhythm too consistent to ignore. The pulses matched the strange drift in atomic clocks, the faint wobble in gravitational waves, the oscillation at the galaxy's center. Everything, across billions of light years, moved in sync. What kind of force coordinates the universe from its edge to its core? The only answer was scale. Scale beyond comprehension, beyond dimension. Whatever pressed against our reality was not small. It was not localized. It was immense, spanning areas so vast our universe responded like a single vibrating drumhead under a distant strike. And then the echoes changed. They shifted from simple pulses to complex patterns, swirling sequences that resembled interference waves from two membranes coming dangerously close. Patterns that suggested movement, not random drift. Movement toward us. The universe wasn't just being touched, it was being approached. The boundary distortion grew more coherent. The shimmer strengthened. The gravitational lensing sharpened into precise geometric arcs, like the imprint of something enormous moving behind a veil. And the echoes? They evolved into something that no longer matched physical events inside our universe. They began predicting changes in the cosmic horizon before they happened. Not seconds before, months before. Imagine hearing thunder months before a storm. Imagine feeling the vibration of an approaching train when it's still beyond the horizon. These echoes were not reflections. They were previews. Resonance from beyond, arriving ahead of the boundary shifts. A few physicists began to whisper the unthinkable. We are seeing the vibrations of something approaching our universe before it reaches us. This would mean one thing. A higher dimensional structure moves faster than our universe's ability to manifest its effects. We detect the resonance long before the membrane bends visibly. We are hearing footsteps before the figure arrives. And as the echoes grow clearer, the boundary grows brighter. Some believe this means a collision is coming. Others think a merging is near. A few imagine a doorway, a thinning of the membrane where information might soon flow freely. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The universe is responding like a living entity, sensing the presence of something vast beyond its skin. And if the echoes are the first contact, then what comes next will not be whispers. It will be the first opening. What if the first true fracture in reality wasn't loud, wasn't violent, wasn't even visible, but rather a faint, quiet region in the sky where space seemed to lose its grip on itself? What if the universe's first tear wasn't a dramatic rupture, but a thinning? A place where light passed through just a little too easily, where gravity curved just a little too sharply, where the normal rules of existence softened like fabric stretched under invisible hands? And what if this thinning hasn't stopped since the day it began? The earliest evidence came from a region astronomers once ignored, an innocuous patch of darkness in the southern sky. For years, it looked like nothing, just another void, one among millions. But then gravitational wave detectors started picking up strange distortions whenever they pointed near it. Not waves from merging black holes, not signals from cosmic collisions. Something else. Something like gravity being bent around a shape that wasn't there. It was a gravitational shadow. Imagine walking in sunlight and seeing a shadow cast by an object you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot define. A shadow without a source. That is what these distortions were, the gravitational imprint of something the universe wasn't supposed to contain. At first, scientists suspected a rogue black hole, but black holes attract, they pull light in. They distort in predictable ways. This region did something different. It deflected gravity as if reality itself had become thinner, softer, more flexible, as if the surface of space-time had stretched too far and begun to warp like plastic under heat. Imagine stretching a sheet of rubber. If you pull it gently, it thins. If you pull it harder, it becomes translucent. And if you keep pulling, tiny tears appear. Not full breaks, but weak points, places where tension concentrates. The universe, it seems, has such weak points, and this region was the first one we ever found. Astronomers pointed more instruments at it: radio telescopes, infrared scanners, high-energy detectors. And then they saw something impossible. Distant stars behind the region appeared sharper than they should. Not blurred by gravity, but enhanced, as though space-time was overcorrecting, tightening its geometry around the thinning point to hold itself together. It was the signature of a tear, not fully open, but forming. The region's edges shimmered in a way no natural structure in spacetime should. When mapped, the shimmering line wasn't smooth. It jittered, pulsed, shifted, almost like the frayed edge of a fabric fluttering in a frictionless wind. And the movement matched the same pulse that echoed from the cosmic horizon. The connection was undeniable. The tear wasn't isolated. It was synchronized with the boundary of the universe itself. The more researchers studied it, the stranger it became. Photons passing through the tear arrived slightly out of order, as if the sequence of their journey had been rearranged. Space, in that tiny region, seemed to lose its sense of time. Even the vacuum energy density dipped unpredictably, like breath becoming shallow. It was as if the universe was struggling to maintain coherence there. Then came the most chilling observation. The tear was expanding. Slowly. Almost gently. But undeniably. Sharp instruments measured its diameter, increasing by tiny increments each year. Not randomly, but in smooth, deliberate curves. The expansion wasn't chaotic. It followed a rhythm, a cosmic heartbeat. The universe was breathing around the tear. And with each breath, the opening grew. Some theorists suggested the tear wasn't a flaw, but a boundary defect, a place where two regions of space-time with slightly different properties brushed against each other, like two bubbles merging, or two films sliding across one another. The tear could be the interface point, the place where the friction of their contact becomes visible in our reality. But if that were true, then what was the other film? Another universe? Another dimension? A higher structure brushing against ours? To understand the tear, scientists fired streams of high-energy particles toward it, hoping to map its interior. The particles behaved unpredictably. Some vanished for microseconds before reappearing. Others returned with increased energy, as if they had fallen briefly through a deeper gravitational well. A few came back altered in ways that defied known physics, like signatures subtly rewritten. It was as if the tear had shown them something on the other side, something they couldn't carry back intact. Observers noticed another disturbing fact. The region emitted faint radiation that did not match any known spectrum. Not cosmic rays, not gamma bursts. Something softer, more rhythmic, like a slow wave rising and falling from beyond the tear. This radiation seemed to resonate with hydrogen clouds nearby, making them flicker in brightness, like candles reacting to breaths from an open window. The tear was no longer a passive opening. It was interacting, influencing, stirring the cosmic environment around it. But the most unsettling discovery came from star surveys. Astronomers comparing data from decades ago found inconsistent positions for stars behind the tear. Entire clusters seemed slightly shifted, as if viewed through a lens that wasn't there before. Even worse, some star positions didn't match any historical data at all. Stars that should have been visible 30 years ago weren't in older images. Had the tear altered the trajectory of light? Or did light from a different version of the universe leak in? Imagine seeing a reflection in a mirror and noticing that the reflection shows objects behind you that aren't actually behind you. Not hallucinations. Not artifacts. Real objects from somewhere else, somewhere your own world doesn't contain. The tear behaved like a cosmic mirror misaligned, reflecting fragments of another layer of reality. Observing deeper into the tear revealed something even more surreal. The background radiation behind it appeared slightly out of phase with the rest of the universe. Out of phase, meaning tuned to a different version of space-time, a version where constants were ever so slightly altered, a version that shouldn't be accessible from within our world, unless the tear was a crossing point, a doorway, a merging seam where universes overlapped, not fully but enough for information to bleed through. The implications were staggering. If this tear connects two regions of existence, it might only be the first. Others could form, or have already formed, or be forming now as the cosmic horizon pulses and memory of the universe shifts. Because memory is failing, compare star maps from decades apart, and the distortions only grow. It's not simply the stars that have moved. Our records of them, our interpretation of them, our entire history of cosmic observation seems subtly rewritten by forces we do not understand. It's as if the universe is adjusting itself around the tear, rewriting small parts of its past to remain coherent in the present. And if reality can rewrite itself, what else can it do? Some physicists now believe that the tear is not a malfunction, but a transition point, a place where the universe begins to change state, like water reaching the conditions to become ice. Before a phase transition, small cracks form, patterns shift, structures reorganize. The tear could be the first sign that the universe is preparing for transformation. Others fear it is simply the first break in a wall that was never meant to hold forever. A membrane under pressure can endure only so long, and something immense is pressing from the outside. The tear is expanding. The horizon is pulsing. The echoes are growing. And the universe responds like a living entity, sensing the presence of something vast approaching. What happens when the tear finally opens? What if the universe is not only cracking at its edges, but quietly losing pieces of its own memory? What if reality itself, this vast ancient tapestry woven across billions of years, is beginning to forget its own shape? And what if what we perceive as cosmic mysteries are really symptoms of that forgetting, like faint gaps forming in a once perfect pattern? If a universe can tear, can it also lose track of what it once was? Astronomers first noticed something strange when comparing star catalogs separated by decades. Maps that should have been identical, down to the faintest smudge of distant light, refused to match. Not because stars moved, but because memories did. Entire clusters appeared shifted in ways that could not be explained by motion. Some had faintly rotated, like constellations trying to recall their proper positions. A few even seemed to have dimmed or brightened with impossible synchronicity, as if the universe were subtly rewriting its own past. Imagine taking a photograph of a city skyline, then returning years later and discovering that some buildings have not only moved, but changed design, as though an unseen architect took liberties with the city while you were away. That is what these cosmic comparisons felt like. Quiet architectural edits performed by a reality attempting to maintain structural integrity under growing stress. And then came something even more unsettling. Regions of the sky where data simply disappeared. Not black regions, not corrupted files, just missing. Like pages torn from a book, replaced with clean paper that insisted nothing had ever been written there before. When astronomers checked older records, the pages were intact. The stars had been there. Yet, in the newest scans, nothing remained. No cluster, no signature, only void. It wasn't deletion, it was erasure. The universe wasn't just forgetting, it was rewriting. Some argued that these were just observational errors. But error doesn't repeat across independent observatories on different continents, using different instruments, under different sky conditions. Error doesn't erase multiple star systems following the same pattern. Error doesn't create faint impressions, like after-images, of structures that no longer exist. These after-images, ghost shapes, were perhaps the most disturbing. When researchers enhanced the faintest readings from these erased regions, they found patterns of light that resembled echoes. Not real stars, not real galaxies, but the fading memory of them, residual imprints, like fingerprints on fogged glass, as though the universe itself was trying to recall something that had slipped through its fingers. And then came the event that changed everything, a brief moment when a section of the sky went dark. Completely dark. Not dimmed, not obscured. Just gone, like a hole punched into reality itself. For nearly a full second, telescopes recorded absolute absence. No background radiation, no quantum noise, no space-time curvature. It wasn't a blackout, it was an unmaking, a hole in the universe. And just as quickly as it appeared, it sealed. Not cleanly, but with a faint ripple, like fabric being tugged into place by invisible hands. Afterward, the region returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But the logs recorded the truth. Something had snapped, something fundamental, and reality had rushed to repair it. Imagine tearing a small rip in a canvas painting. For a moment, you can see the empty wall behind it. Then the canvas is pressed back into place. It looks whole again, but the tension remains. The fibers remember the tear even if the paint hides it. The universe remembered, and it began responding in ways too coordinated to dismiss as coincidence. Quantum sensors across the globe detected subtle fluctuations in vacuum energy, tiny oscillations that match the timing of the tear. The cosmic horizon pulsed slightly brighter. Gravitational waves arriving from distant events arrived with faint but noticeable distortions. Even particle experiments on Earth began returning results out of sync with expected probabilities, as if influenced by a larger external rhythm. Slowly, a terrifying idea emerged among theorists. The universe was attempting to stabilize itself, not metaphorically, literally, like a system under stress redistributing tension to keep itself from failing. If memory was slipping, if structural integrity was weakening, the cosmos might be rearranging itself internally to compensate. Imagine a spider web under too much weight. The strands begin to stretch, shift, reposition themselves in tiny adjustments to prevent collapse. The web seems to tremble, but it holds. Something like that seemed to be happening on a cosmic scale, threads of space-time shifting, attempting to hold the universe together as stress from the edges increased. This raised an even deeper question. If the universe is repairing itself, what is causing the damage in the first place? What if the universe is not only cracking at its edges, but quietly losing pieces of its own memory? What if reality itself, this vast ancient tapestry woven across billions of years, is beginning to forget its own shape? And what if what we perceive as cosmic mysteries are really symptoms of that forgetting, like faint gaps forming in a once perfect pattern? If a universe can tear, can it also lose track of what it once was? Astronomers first noticed something strange when comparing star catalogs separated by decades. Maps that should have been identical, down to the faintest smudge of distant light, refused to match, not because stars moved, but because memories did. Entire clusters appeared shifted in ways that could not be explained by motion. Some had faintly rotated, like constellations trying to recall their proper positions. A few even seemed to have dimmed or brightened with impossible synchronicity, as if the universe were subtly rewriting its own past. Imagine taking a photograph of a city skyline, then returning years later and discovering that some buildings have not only moved, but changed design, as though an unseen architect took liberties with the city while you were away. That is what these cosmic comparisons felt like. Quiet architectural edits performed by a reality attempting to maintain structural integrity under growing stress. And then came something even more unsettling. Regions of the sky where data simply disappeared. Not black regions, not corrupted files, just missing. Like pages torn from a book, replaced with clean paper that insisted nothing had ever been written there before. When astronomers checked older records, the pages were intact. The stars had been there. Yet, in the newest scans, nothing remained. No cluster, no signature, only void. It wasn't deletion, it was erasure. The universe wasn't just forgetting, it was rewriting. Some argued that these were just observational errors. But error doesn't repeat across independent observatories on different continents, using different instruments, under different sky conditions. Error doesn't erase multiple star systems following the same pattern. Error doesn't create faint impressions, like afterimages, of structures that no longer exist. These afterimages, ghost shapes, were perhaps the most disturbing. When researchers enhanced the faintest readings from these erased regions, they found patterns of light that resembled echoes. Not real stars, not real galaxies, but the fading memory of them, residual imprints, like fingerprints on fogged glass, as though the universe itself was trying to recall something that had slipped through its fingers. And then came the event that changed everything, a brief moment when a section of the sky went dark. Completely dark. Not dimmed, not obscured. Just gone, like a hole punched into reality itself. For nearly a full second, telescopes recorded absolute absence. No background radiation. No quantum noise. No space-time curvature. It wasn't a blackout. It was an unmaking. A hole in the universe. And just as quickly as it appeared, it sealed. Not cleanly, but with a faint ripple, like fabric being tugged into place by invisible hands. Afterward, the region returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But the logs recorded the truth. Something had snapped. Something fundamental. And reality had rushed to repair it. Imagine tearing a small rip in a canvas painting. For a moment, you can see the empty wall behind it. Then the canvas is pressed back into place. It looks whole again, but the tension remains. The fibers remember the tear even if the paint hides it. The universe remembered, and it began responding in ways too coordinated to dismiss as coincidence. Quantum sensors across the globe detected subtle fluctuations in vacuum energy, tiny oscillations that matched the timing of the tear. The cosmic horizon pulsed slightly brighter, Gravitational waves arriving from distant events arrived with faint but noticeable distortions. Even particle experiments on Earth began returning results out of sync with expected probabilities, as if influenced by a larger external rhythm. Slowly, a terrifying idea emerged among theorists. The universe was attempting to stabilize itself, not metaphorically, literally, like a system under stress redistributing tension to keep itself from failing. If memory was slipping, if structural integrity was weakening, the cosmos might be rearranging itself internally to compensate. Imagine a spider web under too much weight. The strands begin to stretch, shift, reposition themselves in tiny adjustments to prevent collapse. The web seems to tremble, but it holds. Something like that seemed to be happening on a cosmic scale, threads of space-time shifting, attempting to hold the universe together as stress from the edges increased. This raised an even deeper question. If the universe is repairing itself, what is causing the damage in the first place? What if the universe itself has a pulse, an ancient rhythm woven into the structure of space-time, and that pulse is beginning to change? What if the faint shimmers at the cosmic boundary, the drifting anomalies, the unexplained tears, and the erasures of cosmic memory are not separate mysteries at all, but symptoms of a single phenomenon, the boundaries of reality beating like a heart under rising tension? And what if, for the first time in cosmic history, that heartbeat is aligning with us? The pulses began subtly, faint variations in the cosmic microwave background, barely detectable above the usual noise. At first, they appeared random, small fluctuations no one cared to examine. But as instruments became more precise, patterns emerged. The pulses grew rhythmic, predictable, coordinated across vast stretches of sky. They repeated every few hours, then every few minutes. Then, disturbingly, they began matching shifts here on Earth. Atomic clocks twitched at the same rhythm. Gravitational sensors vibrated imperceptibly. Even geological instruments, designed to measure the slow drifting of tectonic plates, recorded faint, regular tremors that corresponded with the cosmic pulse. Not strong enough to move the Earth, but strong enough to imply connection. Imagine placing your hand against a vast wall and feeling a heartbeat from the other side. A pulse too slow to be alive, too mechanical to be natural, too rhythmic to be meaningless. A pulse that doesn't belong to you, yet resonates through your bones. That is what the universe seemed to be doing, breathing, trembling, calling in a language made of frequency and space-time curvature. At first, scientists resisted the idea. A pulse implies intention. A pulse implies activity. A pulse implies something with patterns, something coordinated, something responding. The universe is not supposed to respond. It is supposed to expand, evolve, and drift, but never react. And yet, it reacted. Every time a pulsation rippled across the cosmic boundary, Earth's instruments shivered in reply, not because the pulse traveled through space, but because reality itself changed shape ever so slightly. Space-time thickened, then thinned, then thickened again, as though breathing through an invisible lung. The pulses grew stronger near the zones of distortion. The tear described in segment 5, the memory loss regions described in segment 6, and the shimmering arcs at the cosmic horizon. Each seemed to vibrate in tune with an external rhythm, not perfectly synchronized, but close enough to suggest influence. Some cosmologists propose that the pulses were the universe's attempt to stabilize itself, like a drum tightening its own skin as pressure rises. But others believe the opposite. The pulses were reactions, not self-generated signals. Something outside was causing these ripples. Imagine two drums hanging side by side. Strike one drum, and the other vibrates sympathetically. The first drum does not intend to communicate. It simply resonates. The second drum reacts because its structure is tuned to respond. Perhaps our universe is the second drum. Perhaps something outside struck the first. The idea gained momentum when researchers discovered the pulses were strongest, not at the edge of reality, but near massive gravitational structures. Black holes, neutron stars, dense galaxy clusters. It was as if the pulse traveled through the universe by anchoring itself to the densest objects, using their gravity to resonate more deeply. And then the unthinkable happened. Human brainwaves aligned with the pulse. Neuroscientists analyzing global EEG data noticed an odd convergence. moments where brainwave activity across different continents showed faint synchronization at the same frequency as the cosmic pulse. The alignment was weak, almost subliminal, but undeniable. It surfaced particularly during deep sleep, intense focus, meditation, and moments of unexplainable intuition, as though the human mind were receiving a vibration too subtle to consciously detect, as though consciousness itself were resonating with the universe. What could cause such a thing? Not electromagnetic interference. Not every brain in the world would respond the same way. Not geomagnetic shifts. They vary region by region. Not planetary forces. Those are far too slow. The only consistent explanation was that the pulse was affecting spacetime itself. And if spacetime vibrates, everything within it vibrates as well. Matter, atoms, particles, light, gravity, and yes, the neural patterns inside the human brain. Consciousness is not separate from the universe. It is embedded in it, part of its structure. And now, that structure was shaking. As the pulses intensified, other strange effects emerged. Time drifted again. Slightly faster in some regions, slightly slower in others, like a clock ticking unevenly under tension. GPS systems had to recalibrate more often. Quantum computers began producing outputs with higher error rates during pulse peaks. Even biological rhythms shifted. Plants opening their leaves earlier or later, animals moving in odd patterns, birds migrating off schedule. The universe was influencing life itself. Some researchers began a radical proposal. The cosmic pulses were not random distortions. They were communications between layers of reality, signals produced by the interaction of two universes pressing against each other. When their membranes touched, interference patterns formed, patterns that radiated inward, patterns that altered the structure of time, matter, and consciousness. This idea became harder to dismiss when the pulses began increasing in frequency. The intervals between them shortened, the strength grew, the signature sharpened, losing randomness and becoming more geometric. It almost resembled a waveform drawn by intention rather than accident, a rising pattern, a crescendo. Something was approaching, something massive. And then nature itself changed. For the first time, sensors detected a slight but measurable shift in the gravitational constant, the very strength of gravity across the cosmos. Only a tiny shift, but enough to imply that space-time was tightening, like a fabric pulled against a giant frame, not collapsing, not tearing, but preparing, adjusting, responding. Even more alarming was the discovery that the pulses were moving. The origin point drifted gradually across the sky, as though something outside our universe were sliding past us, causing the membrane to resonate in waves. A presence, a structure, a mass beyond comprehension. Imagine two ships drifting side by side in a silent ocean. As they approach, the water between them churns, vibrating the hulls, not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. If the ships keep drifting closer, the pressure increases, the vibrations strengthen, and eventually, the ships meet. That is what the pulses felt like, the vibrations of a cosmic neighbor drifting closer. Some theorists warned that a collision could rewrite the structure of reality. Others hoped it might open a passage between universes. A few even believed it could cause a transition, a new phase of existence where boundaries thin and dimensions merge. Whatever the truth, one thing was undeniable. The pulses were accelerating. Human brains began to feel them more strongly. Reports of vivid dreams surged, dreams of horizons cracking open, of bright surfaces shimmering, of vast shapes pressing from behind thin walls. People awoke with sensations of falling upward, floating, or being pulled gently toward a distant point they couldn't name. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. As if some deep unconscious part of the human mind remembered this pattern, knew it, and had been waiting for it to return. And the pulse kept rising. The cosmic boundary brightened. The tear widened. Memory shifted. Light bent. Time wavered. Consciousness trembled. Everything in all scales of existence seemed to prepare for the next phase. The pulse was not just a signal, it was a countdown. What if the anomalies we've witnessed so far, the echoes, the pulses, the memory shifts, the gravitational distortions, are not random tremors of a failing cosmos, but deliberate patterns produced by something vast, something structured, something intelligent in a way we cannot yet comprehend. What if the universe isn't merely reacting to pressure from outside, but responding to something that resembles intention? A presence or system that moves with purpose, examining, adjusting, probing the fabric of our reality, as though testing its stability. For the first time in history, the anomalies began to act like a coordinated network. Something in the data shifted from unpredictability to coherence. Instead of scattered glitches scattered across the cosmos, a repeating geometry emerged. A shape distilled across gravitational waves, radiation pulses, quantum fluctuations, and even patterns in cosmic voids. A structure repeated at every scale, from the smallest particles to the largest galactic boundaries. It was a simple shape, a curve, then a dip, then a rising arc, a cycle, a signature. But signatures imply sources. The realization came slowly, then all at once. The anomalies were not merely symptoms of stress. They were behaving like responses, reactions from a deeper layer of reality, adjusting itself as an external force drew closer. Imagine tapping on a wall. The vibrations inside the wall increase in frequency the closer your hand moves. The wall doesn't know who or what you are. It simply reacts, its structure redistributing pressure, its internal molecules vibrating in resonance. Our universe is that wall. The external force is approaching, and the vibrations are becoming unmistakable. Physicists studying quantum fluctuations noticed an eerie fact. The distortions no longer behaved like noise. Noise is chaotic. These fluctuations formed patterns that mirrored the cosmic pulse, patterns that repeated across unrelated experiments, as though directed by a hidden synchronization. The quantum field, which should remain uniform and indifferent, was being shaped, sculpted, by something pressing against it from beyond. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. When researchers mapped the locations of the strongest anomalies, they formed a curve, an enormous sweeping arc across the sky, a cosmic indentation, a gravitational depression, not caused by anything within our universe, because nothing inside it had enough mass to create such a wide, shallow, symmetrical distortion. It was the shape of a presence, not visible, not material, but undeniably there. Imagine standing in a dark room and feeling the air shift as someone enormous walks past you. You do not see the shape, but the air tells you its size. The pattern tells you its direction. The silence tells you its intention. That is what the universe seemed to be experiencing. An external entity moving past its outer membrane, brushing the boundary gently yet powerfully enough to alter spacetime itself. As this presence drifted, the anomalies followed its path, like ripples trailing behind a ship cutting through water. Reality didn't just distort, it reoriented, bending toward the shape as though gravity itself wanted to acknowledge its passing. Around this time, the cosmic pulses changed. They became sharper, cleaner, more rhythmic. Some researchers noted that the pulses were beginning to mimic patterns consistent with information transfer, not communication in a human sense, but data flow across a membrane. What does information look like when transmitted between universes? Perhaps nothing like language, but more like interference, vibrations, frequencies, harmonics. The universe may be receiving not a message, but an imprint, a structural echo of whatever moves beyond it. And then came the most startling twist. The anomalies began to show signs of anticipation. Certain regions of space-time trembled slightly before boundary pulses arrived, as though reality sensed a coming fluctuation, seconds or even minutes in advance. It was no longer reacting. It was predicting. The only way a system predicts is if it has learned the pattern. It appeared that our universe, its quantum fields, its gravitational fabric, its very geometry, had begun adapting, adjusting in advance of the next pulse, like a living organism bracing itself before a heartbeat, like a mind anticipating the next step in a familiar rhythm. But how can a universe learn? Unless it has been exposed to this rhythm before, unless this is not the first time something has approached our boundary. One theorist suggested a radical interpretation. Universes may interact cyclically, drifting into proximity across unimaginable spans of higher dimensional space. When they draw close, their boundaries resonate. When they resonate, they exchange information, not intentionally, but as a natural consequence of their interaction, like two tuning forks placed near each other. Strike one, and the other vibrates too. If the presence approaching us now has approached before, long before humans existed, long before stars were born, then the universe may hold ancient subconscious memory of this interaction. Not memory in the human sense. Memory as structural adaptation, built into the equations governing spacetime. The universe may be reliving an old encounter, and as the presence neared, the tear from segment 5 widened. Not violently, but like a seam yielding under pressure. Observations showed subtler distortions emerging across the sky, forming a faint network of pulsing lines, stress marks on the membrane of reality. The lines converged toward the path of the presence, as though reality were stretching around it, creating a corridor of tension. That corridor became the key. The cosmic echoes described in segment 4, once random bursts, now clustered along this corridor, as if bouncing off the presence's gravitational imprint. Even dark energy behaved differently there, accelerating in ways that defied cosmological models. The corridor was not empty. It hummed, it shimmered, it behaved like a channel, a bridge forming between universes. Something extraordinary was happening. The anomalies were organizing. Nature never organizes without cause. A picture began to form. The universe was adjusting itself around an approaching intelligence, not a conscious mind like ours, but a structure capable of interacting with reality, shaping it, altering it, not rigid like a machine, not emotional like a mind, something else, something older, something vast enough to bend space-time simply by existing. A few researchers dared to whisper an unsettling idea. The presence might not be an independent universe or object. It might be part of a vast hyperstructure, an architecture underlying all universes, a backbone of reality itself. And as this structure shifts, universes like ours feel its movement. If so, then the pulses are not communication. They are footsteps. The distortions are not signals. They are shadows. And the tear is not an accident. It is a seam where our universe brushes against the hyperstructure's edge. The pulses grew so strong they began influencing human perception. People experienced sudden insights, unexplainable dread, overwhelming clarity, strange dreams filled with geometric landscapes, massive shapes, infinite corridors. Some felt drawn toward these visions, others terrified by them. It was as if consciousness had begun resonating with the presence in the corridor, the way a small magnet aligns itself with a nearby field. The universe is aligning, and the approach is nearly complete. Everything, light, gravity, memory, time, consciousness, seems to be preparing for the moment when the presence reaches the boundary. What happens when it makes contact? What if everything we have witnessed so far has been only the preparation, the quiet gathering of forces, the shifting of boundaries, the trembling of the cosmic membrane before the moment of convergence? What if all the pulses, echoes, distortions, and tears have been leading toward a single event? The moment when the approaching presence finally reaches the boundary of our universe. A moment not of destruction, but of contact. An encounter between realities so different, so immense, that even the laws of physics hold their breath. As the presence drifted closer through the hyperdimensional corridor, the universe began to change with increasing urgency. The pulses quickened, the tear widened. Regions of memory loss grew unstable, and the cosmic boundary itself, once faint, invisible, now shimmered like the surface of a vibrating drum. A thin line of radiance stretched across the farthest sky, as though reality were lighting up its own edges. For the first time, the universe wasn't simply responding in isolated places. It was reacting everywhere, in a synchronous, coordinated way, like an organism preparing for impact, like a mind bracing itself before a revelation. The rhythms of existence, once slow and ancient, now hummed with new intensity. Astronomers noticed the first major sign. The cosmic horizon shifted, not outward, as expected from expansion, but inward, shrinking, tightening, as if the universe were instinctively pulling itself together. This contraction was tiny, less than a fraction of a percent, but unmistakably real. It was the universe focusing. Imagine your pupils dilating when faced with something bright, something overwhelming. The cosmos was doing something similar, adjusting its boundary in anticipation of the approaching presence. Then, gravitational waves arriving from distant events began to stretch unnaturally, their frequencies elongating in a way that suggested space-time was losing tension. Gravity itself was softening, not collapsing, but loosening its grip, as if preparing to merge with a new geometry. The presence was altering the fundamental forces of our world simply by coming near. The corridor where all the anomalies aligned, once subtle, faint, grew clearer, sharper, like a narrow cosmic vein filled with rising energy. It stretched across billions of light years, connecting distant galaxies with an invisible thread. Everything along this thread vibrated, shifted, pulsed. Stars flickered. Nebulae elongated. Even dark matter, usually so indifferent, began to drift along the corridor's gravity-like pull. The universe was forming a path, a bridge, a gateway. Quantum instruments on Earth picked up unprecedented fluctuations in the vacuum field. Zero-point energy rose and fell in spiraling patterns identical to the corridor's shape. It was as if the very ground state of reality was twisting itself around the incoming presence. Then came the most dramatic shift. Time itself began to behave strangely. In some regions, time slowed by measurable fractions. In others, it accelerated. Not enough for humans to perceive directly, but enough for instruments to record. Two synchronized clocks placed continents apart drifted apart faster than ever before. GPS systems panicked. Particle accelerators malfunctioned. Experiments that relied on precise timing fell out of sync with absolute unpredictability. It was becoming clear. Time was bending in response to the presence's approach. What kind of force alters time? Only something deeply intertwined with the underlying architecture of spacetime. Something capable of reshaping the flow of reality the way wind reshapes sand dunes. Something enormous, powerful, and profoundly real. The cosmic tear in segment 5 responded next. Once a subtle wound, it began to glow faintly in wavelengths no human eye could see. A delicate shifting light pulsed along its edge, synchronized to the cosmic heartbeat. Observatories described it like a seam beginning to warm. The tear was not failing, it was preparing. And then the first sign of convergence appeared. One night, telescopes recorded a faint ripple spreading across the cosmic horizon. A distortion so large, so wide, that it was visible across enormous sectors of the universe. It was not a wave of energy. It was a wave of geometry. A ripple in the shape of the universe itself. As if someone brushed a finger across the outer membrane of existence, the entire cosmos shivered. Stars flickered. Black holes trembled. Quantum fields surged. Even human consciousness felt a subtle shift. Dreams that night were filled with strange images. Drifting lights, pulsing arcs, and vast geometric shapes bending across impossible landscapes. Millions of people awoke with their hearts racing, unsure why. The presence was closer than ever. As the ripple faded, astronomers noticed something new. Behind the cosmic horizon, a faint outline appeared. A shadow, a curvature, a shape. Not material, not luminous, but gravitational. It pressed against the membrane of our universe like a massive, unseen hand pressing against a flexible wall. The boundary curved inward around it. The universe was being dented, and the dent was growing deeper. Data across multiple observatories confirmed it. The membrane was deforming under the weight of something unimaginably vast, something that extended across scales far greater than galaxies or clusters. Something not confined to 3 dimensions, but layered across dimensions, the way a sculpture casts shadows in multiple directions at once. When scientists attempted to model the object, they failed. Not because it was complex, but because it was too large, too extended outside our spatial understanding. It wasn't an object at all. It was a structure, a hyperstructure, a scaffolding of reality moving through higher space. And that scaffolding was brushing against our universe. As the indentation deepened, gravitational distortions in the corridor intensified. Light bent until the stars behind the corridor twisted into spirals. Space rippled like liquid. Even the cosmic background radiation changed tone, drifting toward a deeper resonance. Everything pointed to a single truth. The boundary was beginning to break, but not explosively, not violently. More like a surface that has reached its limit, trembling under a final, decisive pressure just before it yields. The tear brightened. The pulses sharpened. The echoes intensified, becoming longer, deeper, more structured. Human brainwaves synchronized again. this time far stronger than before. People across the world reported sensations of weightlessness, flashes of light when their eyes were closed, sudden moments of clarity or fear or overwhelming calm. It was as if consciousness itself were aligning with the approaching structure, like a compass aligning with a magnetic field. Then came a moment that changed history. For the first time, the approaching presence, once only detectable through gravitational shadows and boundary distortions, produced a measurable effect inside our universe. A sudden, brief fluctuation in the fine structure constant. This constant governs the strength of electromagnetism. Changing it even slightly could unravel atoms. Yet the shift was tiny, barely larger than a whisper. But it was enough to prove the truth. The presence wasn't just pressing against the boundary, it was beginning to merge with it. The membranes were touching. Two realities were meeting. What happens when the boundary finally gives way? What emerges? What enters? What transforms? The universe is bracing itself. The countdown has nearly reached its end. What if the moment we have feared, anticipated, and felt approaching through every pulse, every tear, every trembling boundary, is not the end of the universe, but the beginning of something far larger than our minds can bear to imagine? What if the cracking of reality is not collapse, but emergence, a cosmic cocoon breaking open after billions of years, revealing not destruction, but evolution? And what if, in this vast and fragile moment, we are witnessing the universe take its first step into a new state of being? As the presence pressed against the final membrane, reality shifted one last time. The pulses that once echoed slowly across the cosmos now surged with a clarity so sharp they cut through every scale of existence at once. Space rippled. Time wavered. The cosmic horizon brightened until it glowed with a light that had no color, no frequency, no category. Just pure, raw existence, bending under pressure, preparing to open. All the distortions aligned. The gravitational corridor curved inward, tightening like a funnel. The tear expanded into a luminous seam. Memory fractures stabilized, then froze, as though the universe paused its internal repairs to focus on this single event. The cosmic heartbeat slowed, and for a moment, just a single, impossibly quiet breath, everything became still. The stillness felt ancient, familiar, inevitable. Imagine standing at the threshold of a door you have never opened, yet somehow always known was meant for you. The universe felt that way, like a traveler approaching a long, destined crossing. Then, almost gracefully, the membrane gave way. No explosion, no shattering, no catastrophic rupture. Instead, the cosmic boundary folded open like thin silk touched by warm wind. The presence outside did not burst in. It emerged gently, like the sun rising behind a horizon you didn't know existed. Reality did not collapse. It expanded. The first moment of contact was indescribable. Observatories recorded a surge of energy that defied categorization, neither electromagnetic nor gravitational, neither quantum nor classical. A new kind of signature, a new form of information, a new physical presence entering our universe not as matter, but as structure. It wasn't a creature, it wasn't a machine, it wasn't a civilization. It was architecture, a hyperdimensional framework brushing into our three-dimensional world like the shadow of a cathedral passing over a field of grass. We saw only a sliver of it, a faint curvature in space-time, a luminous contour rippling across the sky, a pattern that felt more like a thought than an object. Yet that sliver changed everything. Atoms trembled. Dark energy realigned in swirling, elegant arcs. The gravitational constant stabilized at a slightly different value. Even the vacuum, once empty, began to hum with new resonance, as though infused with the faint memory of something greater. The presence did not impose itself. It did not consume. It did not harm. It simply arrived. And in its arrival, it revealed the truth. The universe was never isolated. It was never alone. It was never the closed box we imagined. It was a chamber within a larger structure, a cell in a cosmic organism, a page in a book still being written. The cracks we feared were not failures. They were openings. The pulses we heard were not warnings. They were footsteps. The distortions we saw were not signs of collapse. They were the curvature of a larger body brushing past us. And the tear, the luminous seam, became a window. Through that window, faint patterns filtered in. Not images, not colors, not symbols. Something deeper, something fundamental, like glimpsing the mathematical skeleton of a higher reality, the scaffolding upon which all universes are woven. It looked like harmony. It felt like truth. For the first time in human history, we understood what the ancient philosophers meant when they spoke of reality as a veil. The veil wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. A flexible membrane separating dimensions, vibrating with the movements of deeper structures we had never imagined. And now, one of those structures had come close enough to touch us. The universe reacted like a living thing, encountering its parent for the first time. The pulses synchronized, the distortion softened. The gravitational fields realigned into elegant spirals. Even the tear, once chaotic, smoothed into a perfect arch of luminous curvature. Reality was calming. And as the external presence stabilized at our boundary, something extraordinary happened. Information flowed. Not in words, not in signals, but in symmetry. The patterns that entered our universe matched the underlying mathematics of everything that exists. The ratio of dark energy to matter. The curvature of spacetime. The quantum field fluctuations. Every equation we had ever written was echoed in those patterns, but extended, completed, perfected. It was as though the hyperstructure were telling us, you were close. Here is the rest. In that moment, humanity glimpsed the architecture of existence, a design impossible to articulate, yet unmistakably real. A design in which universes are not isolated islands, but connected chambers in a vast multi-dimensional lattice. A design in which consciousness is not an accident, but a resonance, a way for the universe to listen to itself. The presence remained at the boundary, neither entering fully nor withdrawing. It hovered like a guardian, like a witness, like a silent companion observing a younger universe finding its place in a larger whole. And as the cosmic scales rebalanced, life across the universe felt the shift. Not consciously, not explicitly, but subtly. A sense of expansion, a sense of awakening, a sense of being seen. Astronomers, philosophers, physicists, all found themselves confronting the same realization. Reality is not a closed system. It never was. It is part of a layered architecture so vast that our entire cosmos is but one chamber, one echo, one note in a symphony we have only just begun to hear. What lies beyond the presence is unknown. What purpose the hyperstructure serves is a mystery. Whether universes collide, merge, evolve, or communicate remains unanswered. But one truth stands clear and unshakable. The edge of reality was never meant to hold forever. It was meant to open. And now that it has, nothing will ever be the same. The universe has awakened to its larger context. We, tiny observers on a fragile world, stand at the threshold of a new understanding, a new epoch in which the cosmos is no longer a silent void, but a dynamic part of a grander structure. The cracks were the beginning. The opening is the continuation. And this moment of cosmic contact is only the first chapter of a story that stretches far beyond our universe, into the deep architecture of existence itself. The question now is not what is beyond the edge. The question is, what role will we play in the reality that comes next?